everybody, this is GGB. Today we're going to be getting into the Friday games. As you could tell, I'm still not feeling best, and I'm still very much under the weather, but let's get into these games. So I can talk about them, and then I'll be done, because I really want to go to bed right now, but my throat is killing me, and everything else that is going on with me. I don't know if you guys ever got this. If you guys ever gotten, like, sick, where you're, like, the inside of your ears, like, the little hole where you get to hear sound, like, it's gotten so sore, it's, like, expanded for me. So, like, it's, like, a smaller hole that I'm used to, and it's, like, kind of thrown off my balance so far. And, like, I hear people a lot less because, like, again, there's a smaller hole to hear things from. So, I don't know. That's the weirdest side effect I've had so far from getting this weird disease, which isn't COVID, because I've already had that. So, I don't know what's going on with me right now, but let's get into this thing. At 6 o'clock, we got Wake Forest, which is sitting at 3-0, one of the two undefeated ACC teams left. Traveling to Virginia. Virginia's coming off a heartbreaking loss. We'll get to that later, but they're sitting at 2-1, so still a playoff-eligible team. Virginia's favored by 4 points on this one on ESPN2. Now, again, Wake Forest have not been playing the cream of the crop opponents. Again, they started out the season with a 42-10 win over Old Dominion, the Monarchs. Then they followed it up with a 41-16 win over Norfolk State Spartans. And then they ended up getting their probably most impressive win of the season last weekend with a 35-14 win over FSU. Last weekend, Sam Hartman, their quarterback, went 22-31, threw for 259 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Christian Beal-Smith, their running back, ended up having 19 carries for 95 yards and a touchdown. And A.T. Perry, their receiver, ended up having 7 receptions last week for 155 yards and a touchdown. So, all in all, a pretty great week for that Wake Forest offense. But they're going up against the Virginia team that is also very, very good passing the ball. Now, they are 2-0. They started the season with a 43-0 win over William and Mary. They had a 42-14 win over Illinois, but then it all came crashing down this weekend with a 59-39 loss to number 21 UNC. And, you know, it's a bad weekend for your defense. When you put up 39 points, you still lose by 20 points. Like, it's not like the Virginia offense was bad. Their quarterback, Brennan Armstrong, went 39-54, threw for 554 yards, which is an insane amount of yards, 4 touchdowns and a pick. Jacob Rodriguez, the running back, again, they did nothing on the ground. This was all Brennan Armstrong in this game. He ended up having 3 carries for 14 yards, only 24 rushing yards in total for the entire team. Dontavian Wicks was the leading receiver for this team, had 7 receptions for 183 yards and a touchdown. Now, Virginia leads this series 34-16. They have 4. The win streak, on the other hand, goes to Wake Forest. They've won their 4 straight in this matchup. Now, Wake Forest is traveling to Virginia, traveling to the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers have shown they can be a pretty explosive offense, but so is Wake Forest. Their lowest scoring game was 35 points. Now, again, the lowest scoring Virginia game was 39 points. So if you're ever going to take the over in a game, it's got to be this one, right? Because you have 2 very high-flying offenses going against each other. This should be a shootout. I like the Demon Deacons here. I think the Demon Deacons are a better football team than a lot of people are giving them credit for. I think they're actually competitor in the ACC this year. Give me Wake Forest to win this one and pull off the upset against the Cavaliers. At 7 o'clock, we got Liberty, which sits at 3-0. Traveling to Syracuse, which lost this, got a bounce-back win last weekend. So it was Liberty's favorite with 6 points in this game on ACC Network. So how was Liberty's season started out? Honestly, really good. They ended up having a 48-7 win against Campbell. Their second game against Troy was a lot closer than they hoped it would be. Ended up barely pulling it out with a 21-13 win over Troy. So again, an 8-point game, 1 possession game. So the Trojans actually held it close, which is a lot more than a lot of people thought the Trojans could do in that game. But they ended up getting a bounce-back win this weekend with a 45-17 win over the Monarchs in Old Dominion. So their quarterback, Malik Willis, obviously led the team in passing. He ended up going 21-28, threw for 242 yards and 4 touchdowns. He also rushed 9 times for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns. C.J. Daniels was their leading reception, and he ended up having 5 receptions for 70 yards and a touchdown. So, the real question for this football team is how much does Malik Willis have to carry them? I understand they were able to get out of Troy with a very good defense, by the way, but again, defense has been pretty solid. The most was given up was 17 points against Old Dominion. Let's go against Syracuse real quick. We'll talk about them real quick. They started out the season with a huge win, 29-9 over Ohio. And they got a heartbreaker. They ended up losing 17-7 against Rutgers, but then ended up getting a bounce-back win this weekend against Albany, 62-24. Garrett Schrader threw the ball in 15 times, but he ended up having 11-15, threw for 190 yards and a touchdown, also rushed for 2 touchdowns. He also threw a pick in this game, though. Sean Tucker was their most explosive player on the ground, 13 carries for 132 yards and 4 touchdowns. But Sean Tucker was also their most explosive player through the passing game, and having 3 catches for 121 yards and a touchdown. So again, if you're going to beat Liberty, you got to figure out how to stop Malik Willis. Not many teams have been able to do it so far. Again, Troy, it only eliminated them to 21 points, which is an insane feat for this offense. So if you're the Syracuse defense, you're going to be watching Troy film all week, because they were obviously doing something right against Malik Willis. The good thing, if you're Syracuse, is they don't seem to have much of a ground game. Again, Malik Willis was the only player that would seem to get any semblance of a ground game going against Old Dominion this past week. At least 2 teams have played twice before. That's a tied record of 1-1. The last one going to Liberty last year, but this is probably going to end up being a better game than a lot of people expect. Obviously, Liberty's a team that it's a dark horse to possibly be a playoff candidate. I know this is insane, but if you think about it logistically, Ole Miss, if they go undefeated on that side, they end up beating Alabama, Arkansas, or whatever. If they end up beating all those teams, Ole Miss could very easily be a number 1 overall team this year. And Liberty does get the opportunity to play them. And if they beat them, I feel like you have a legitimate argument, if you're Liberty, to be a playoff candidate. Because this is a Liberty team that looks extremely good this year. It's a very good quarterback that should go in the first round. I think this is an exciting Flames team. On the other hand, Syracuse it's a disappointing team this year, I gotta say. I'm not entirely impressed with what Syracuse has been able to bring to the table so far. They've only played against one Power 5 team so far, and they only put up 7 points in that game. So again, a little bit disappointing in that offensive output. Syracuse wants to win. You got to duplicate what Troy did on defense, but I just don't know if they're going to be able to, especially against this explosive Liberty offense. Give me Liberty here to pull out the win against Syracuse, but Syracuse to cover. At 9 o'clock, this is going to be an interesting game. I'll explain to you why I'm picking it later. But we got UNLV, which is at 0-3, traveling to number 22, top 25 team this week, Fresno State. Fresno State sitting at 3-1, and normally, if you don't know, if you haven't been following my channel for a while, I do my predictions on who is technically available for the playoffs. So, well, the season starts off extremely rough because I've got to do every single game. Eventually, the games narrow it down. There's less games that actually matter. And again, I'm only picking about 10, 12 games a week in college, and it's much more manageable. But Fresno State has already lost the game, which normally in my eyes would eliminate them from playoff contentions because they are Group of 5, normally one loss, Group of 5 teams. Like, there hasn't been a Group of 5 team that has ever made it. But you got to think a one-loss Group of 5 team does not have a phenomenal chance at making it. But I'll get to why I think Fresno State actually has a legitimate shot at making a playoff berth this year a little bit later. Fresno State's favored by 30.5 points in this game on CBS Sports Network. So UNLV started off the season with a heartbreaking loss against Eastern Washington, 35-33 loss against Eastern Washington. That was obviously a heartbreaker. It was very close. I think it went into multiple overtimes, but then they had a less close loss, 37-10 against 37-10 loss against then number 23 Arizona State. And then they had, obviously, this weekend's loss against number 14 Iowa State. So again, not the best team Cameron Friel led the team in passing yards last week. He ended up going 8 of 13, threw for 67 yards and a pick. Again, when that's your starting, when that's the best quarterback stats you have to put up, obviously not the best week. Charles Williams. He did not have the best day on the ground, ended up having 19 carries for 42 yards. Giovanni Fallo Sr. ended up having like 4 receptions for 36 yards, and yes, he did lead the team in receiving receptions and receiving yards. So, yeah, not great. But Fresno State, on the other hand, has had a very impressive start to the season. They ended up having a 45-0 win over UConn, a 31-24 loss against then number 11 Oregon, but Oregon has then shot up the rankings to the 3rd overall team, and this was a Fresno State team that was leading in the 4th quarter. So Fresno State, in my opinion, this is not a loss that you should be looked on unfavorably. I think that's why I'm picking them for a game like this, because I still believe they're legitimate playoff contenders because of that. Their only loss being to a top 3 now, Oregon team that has looked phenomenal so far, and I don't think you can really blame them for that. Oregon can crawl into number 1, and Fresno State goes undefeated down the stretch. I don't know if you can blame the committee for trying to put in Fresno State here. Again, a lot of stuff would have to happen, but I think it'd be a pretty insane cause of events if we could end up seeing our first one-loss Group of 5 team. They followed that game up with a 63-10 win over Cal Poly, and then they ended up having the amazing squeaker of a game that ended up being one of the best games of the weekend, and I predicted perfectly if you want to go back and watch that video. They won that game 40-37 against number 13 UCLA. Obviously, they've dropped considerably since that time, but this was a very good UCLA team heading into that game, and a UCLA team that was possible playoff contenders. A lot of them were thinking, and that humbled them a little bit. Jake Hader, their quarterback, I don't know if he's going to be starting in this game. I don't know if it matters a whole lot considering how much UNLV sucks at this point. But Jake Hader did have an amazing game last week. Obviously, had the game-winning drive, 2 drives that really, the one that took the lead, the 3-point lead, and then the other team went and scored a touchdown. And then they were down by 4 points with like 55 seconds left, and he drove them 75 yards to get a touchdown and win that game. Jake Hader, those were his 2 touchdown passes, went 39-53, threw for 455 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Ronnie Rivers on the ground had a pretty solid day, 21 carries for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Jalen Cropper, their receiver, ended up having 14 receptions, 141 yards and a touchdown. So again, this Fresno State team is a legitimate threat in the Mountain West, and the Mountain West is looking like a really tough conference this year. So Fresno State can go undefeated in that conference. It can be an insane event, but Fresno State does have a shot at this playoff berth, in my opinion. See, I don't know if Hainer looked really hurt at the end of the last game, so I don't know if he's going to be healthy for this one. But I think even if you're playing your backup quarterback, UNLV just does not have enough anywhere on this roster to make me think that they are a legitimate contender this year at anything except for the prize for the worst college football team, which UConn and UMass are definitely giving them a run for this year, but UNLV is absolute trash. But obviously, I think Fresno State's a really good football team. I love the Bulldogs here. I'd take the spread and the Bulldogs to win.